An Empire of Ice and Fire by Longclaw 1-6. Chapter 28. Alliance. Feeling the sun's rays stab through the window shades, John's eyes fluttered open, blinking away the grogginess, but once again he did not help himself but smile on his face. Curled up next to him was Daenerys, his dragon, half on top of him and clutching his chest tightly. Gently stroking her back, John's eyes raked over the naked form in his bed. She was so beautiful, so perfect. He felt blessed by the old gods and the new to have her beside him once more. It's not polite to stare at your queen. Oh? John smirked, watching Dany try to appear asleep and regal. Moving his hands to clutch her waist, John pulled her on top of him, earning a slight yelp. Now you're awake, my queen. Yawning, Dany nuzzled her head onto John's chest. The best pillow in the 7 kingdoms. Gently, she kissed the scar over his heart, the injury that almost killed him. She resolved to kiss it at least once a day, remind herself that John wasn't going anywhere. I could get used to this. And what would that be, my dragon? Silver hair down and forming a halo around her face, she looked like an angel. Running her hand along John's jaw, Dany marvelled at the kind, strong, honourable man she had fallen for. Being with you, blood of my blood, my one and only, the father of my children. Children he didn't even know existed. You need to tell him tomorrow, or I will. Sansa's words echoed in Dany's mind. She didn't plan on telling him about her visit to Viserys. Too much for him to worry about. But he needs to know about the twins. Our twins. Dany knew he'd be an amazing father. John? Stop, she said as his hands continued to caress her. This must be serious. John frowned. Did you ever hear any news about me in Winterfell? Or Castle Black? She bit her lip. Not much. I knew some about the capture of Meereen and that you had dragons after Rhaegal came to me. But that's it. Why? Dany sighed. After I left Winterfell, I gave birth to twins. She saw John's eyes widen. They're yours, John. You are a father. Of all that Daenerys could have told him, the fact that he had fathered children with her, without even knowing it, hadn't been one he imagined. Bastards named Snow. Eyes formed in his veins. He had sworn to never do this, never burden any woman or any child with that disgrace. John, my love. Dany gripped his chin. Listen to your queen. Don't. Tears threatened to form at the self-hatred on his features. Please. I fathered bastards. No! She kissed him, willing the thoughts away from his mind. They are legitimate prince and princess, my love. My children. She took his hand and placed it over her belly, where the twins had once been. Our children. Her thumb stroked his stubble-covered cheeks, feeling his tension slowly dissipate. They know nothing but love. I promise. Looking at her, at Dany, John knew she had told the truth, but it was still hard. Everything he had vowed, why he stayed a virgin for so long while Robb and Theon enjoyed their times in Wintertown, had been shattered. I never got to see them, Dany. You know if I knew, I would have... Yes, John, I know you would have. What are their names? Arya and Rhaegar. When Dany smiled and told him, John felt his heart clench. Arya and Rhaegar, after my sister and my father. Quite fitting, and names that showed how much Dany had loved him as far as they had been from each other. Catching his look of love, Dany slammed their lips together and the kiss quickly became heated. Their tongues tangled together. John groaned as Dany's lips trailed from his mouth to his chin and his neck. Dany, Can I ask you something? You may, Jon Snow, she purred. Were you ever betrothed to anyone? In Essos? It had been bothering him. No. Well, I ask because you'll need to make alliances. Tyrion said the same, that marriage is the best tool. And then suddenly she understood where he was getting at. Amethyst's eyes stared up at him. Are you seeking a betrothal with me, Jon Snow? He nodded. It would help with the North, my queen. In his brooding way, the betrothal was on the table. Dany lunged forward and kissed him. Yes, yes, yes! She poured every bit of love and emotion into the kiss. I accept. Grinning madly, the silver-haired queen kissed down his body. Anyway, I am going to skip past that bit right there. I've missed this. Kissing his cheek, loving how his beard tickled her lips. Daenerys noticed Jon staring at nothing in particular. What are you thinking about, my king? Jon sighed. I still can't believe I'm a father. To children without wings and scales. He kissed her forehead. What do they look like? He kissed her forehead again. Emotion, it caused his voice to waver. The Northerner hadn't seen them, and he loved them already. Her heart melted at how Jon asked about their children. Daenerys knew he'd be a wonderful father. It was one of the reasons she loved him so. Rhaegar has my eyes and your hair, while Arya has my hair and your eyes. Otherwise, they look like a mix of both of us. She rested her head on his chest, right over his scar. They speak both Valyrian and the common tongue. Precocious, strong, and kind at the same time. Myself, Lady Catelyn, and Jorah Mormont. We told them about you, Jon. They love their father. I have to see them. But we can't. Not yet. There was just so much to do. To get the Northern Lords together and try, with Sansa and Robb, to get them to ally with the Targaryen Queen. It hurt him, but Mr. Aemon's words came to mind. Love is the death of duty. A small chuckle left Dany's lips. It morphed into happy laughter at the puzzled look on her Dragon Wolf's face. Jon, my love, you do realise we have dragons? Watching the realisation crumble over him was quite amusing. Travelling across continents was far easier on Dragonback. Tyrion will probably want a meeting after he arrives between our advisors and mine. After that, we'll leave. She kissed him again. Besides, I'll need to coordinate things in Dragonstone anyway. That you do. Jon brought their lips back together. Cup clutched between his bony fingers. Payette Pri placed it in front of Bran's mouth. You are quite the boy, Brandon of House Stark. Great magic resides within you. Not much is needed. The shade of the evening only filled a fourth of what it would be for any other warlock. As Bran drank it, his lips turned to the faintest shade of blue. Finishing it, the grimace on Bran's face refused to go away. Couldn't you stir some sugar into it or something? Since King Zorazan Daxos granted he and his party both room in Karth and the ability to study with the warlocks in the House of the Undying, the one thing that drove Bran insane was the foul drink. To do so would pollute his abilities, young Stark, the warlock replied. Now, let us begin. Bran turned to Mira. She hadn't really left his side since they arrived, given that Hodor now knew how to deal with Jojen's affliction. You can wait by the door if you want, Mira. No! Mira grabbed onto Bran's shoulder, rooting herself in place. I stay with him. She couldn't trust the wraith-like warlock as far as she could throw him. He had ulterior motives, was hiding something. There was no doubt in her mind. Said wraith-like face curled into a supposedly friendly smile, more like a malevolent sneer. But of course, the magic is more powerful when in proximate of care and love exist. Focuses the soul. At the word love, a blush formed on Mira's tough exterior, and she backed away from Bran. waiting patiently a few steps away. Payet Pri stepped forward and looked into Bran's eyes, his face mere inches from Bran. Trust in your power. Trust in the magic flowing within. Lose yourself in your vision. The voice of the chief warlock grew fainter and fainter. Blackness enveloped Bran's vision, his eyes rolling back into his head. An old man came into view, one Bran had seen countless times in his dreams, in his visions. The one thing about them he wouldn't tell the warlocks. For what reason he didn't know. Hello again, Branded Stark. The man's expression was one of a lifetime of pain, loneliness, and wisdom, but he looked genuinely pleased for Bran to be there. Your time isn't long, so prepare for us being so far apart. Bran stepped forward to him, gliding across the ground. Who are you? It wasn't like before, when he hadn't been crippled. Here everything just seemed surreal, as if he was floating. A wistful smile crossed the older man's face. In due time. He pointed around them. What do you see? Shuddering, Bran felt a dark chill fill his body. Odd, since the day outside looked to be as hot as the day could be. It was soon clear why. What had once been a vibrant landscape had changed into a scene of death. Bones littered the ground as far as the eye could see. Human bones, ox bones, giant skeletons of mammoth, all jumbled together. There were even fresh corpses of various stages of rot, vultures and rats picking at them. Where are we? The centre of the world. A massive horn sounded off in the distance, and it was then that Bran saw it, a towering structure. But there it loomed, casting much of the landscape dark in its shadow. King's Landing? Yes. Once great, and now a den of great evil. A massive ramp led up to the mountain. Mountainous pyramid. Stone faces enveloped the small mountain that served as its base. As it was slowly being erected, thousands of slaves and dozens of plains mammoths lugged great blocks of stone, thousands of other slaves putting them into place. The mountain of the God King. Seeing the gleaming golden statue atop the pyramid, Bran nodded, recognizing the face from long ago. The head of the Chimera. Wiping a sheen of sweat off his brow, Clegane grimaced as the faith militant with a sadistic sneer smacked him across the back. No slacking! Clegane gritted his teeth and placed his 2 hands on the back of the rope slung over his back, muscle straining as he added his strength to the 30 labour slaves dragging the massive stone block up the ramp of the pyramid. 5 years before, the moron militant would have had his head caved in by the hound. Now, oh, you talked me into this, I don't have a fucking clue, he growled at his companion, right next to him. Beric Dondarrion laughed, humming happily as he helped pull the plug. What better place for the Lord of Light to take us than here? Beric and Thoros of Myr had found Clegane after Arya Stark left him to die, and brought him back to the capital. Thoros had a vision, apparently, while Beric said the best place was to hide in plain sight. Clegane didn't believe in Beric's insane red god, but the latter did make some kind of sense, even though he wouldn't admit it. Don't you want to serve your god king? Sandor just glared at him. Serve that fucking idiot once was enough for me. A commotion halted the line, overseers rushing down the ramp. A mammoth tied to one of the massive stone halls had collapsed. Its anguished cries told Clegane all he needed to know. It was dying. Exhaustion and fatigue taking its toll. The overseers were having none of it, one of them bringing his whip down on the beast again and again. Fucking bastards, he muttered under his breath. Didn't take you for an animal lover. Cruelty for cruelty's sake is for monsters, like my brother. When the hound killed someone, he did it quickly. The throng still blocked by the now dead mammoth, the faith militant and Essosi overseers began grabbing up other slaves to help them unharness the beast. So, what do the morons say about Joffrey? Clegane asked in a low whisper. He gestured to the procession nearing the base of the ramp, the sept of the Chimera in the background. Guards, nobles, and high priests clustered marching in formation, and the High Sparrow leading. In the centre was a massive litter held aloft by hulking slaves. Meryn Trant and Qyburn, master of whisperers, walked on either side. Nestled under an awning was the God King himself. At Beric's look, the hound shrugged. Curious. Beric laughed again. Some say he came from the stars. Others say that the gods themselves swept down from the heavens to place him in his mother's womb. If they only knew. Clegane spat on the dusty ground. Fucking idiots. If that little shit came from the stars, then this, he pointed to his burnt skin, is a beauty mark. You've always had a certain prettiness about you, Sandor, Beric replied glibly, earning him a death glare. At this point, Merentrant hollered, All hail the king! The slaves dropped to their knees, setting the litter on the ground. A great horn resounded, Brother Lancer Lannister blowing through the massive instrument whose boom could be heard as clear to Dragonstone. What happened next was conditioned into every living person in King's Landing since it had been decreed the year before, driven to a point where it was near instinctive. Sandor and Beric scrambled off their knees and onto their bellies. Over 1.25 million inhabitants, 250,000 slaves prostrated themselves prone in a wide circle centering around the litter. Sandor found the whole thing insane, but he did not want to die for Joffrey of all people. But then a rustle of wind and the occasional grunt of a mammoth was heard once the horn fell silent. Soon only one left standing was the High Sparrow himself. This alone signified him as the one with the utmost power in the realm of the Chimera. A high honour one wouldn't have expected based on his homespun shift and unkempt features. Hands crossed over his chest, the High Sparrow hurried over to the grand litter where his sovereign sat. Joffrey narrowed his eyes, scrutinising the monument. Why aren't they working harder? Snarled Joffrey. Only the High Sparrow could talk directly to Joffrey in public. What would you have me do, All Highest? A savage grin curled on Joffrey's face, forming a fist. Set an example! Nodding in understanding, the High Sparrow rose and scurried off to head of the column. This had happened before, when his conscience had always been satisfied that the will of the Seven was being carried out by their child. The God King is displeased with this lack of progress. Impurity of the soul was one to blame, so the evil spectres needed to be cast forth to reclaim purity. Bring his highest, an offering! Clegane kept his head low, as did Beric. The sadists that compromised the faith militant and overseers always picked someone whose head poked up. Ha! Turning his head, Clegane watched an overseer whipped through the cluster of slaves to reach a comely young woman. She started to shriek in terror as the faith militant hefted her up and carried her onto the side of the ramp. O Holy Seven, at the command of your child on this earth, we seek your forgiveness and grace with this offering. The High Sparrow raised his arms, and such was the last Sandor saw of the girl, her mouth open in a scream of terror as the militants tossed her over the side, screams that ended with a sickening crunch. One sharp blow of the horn brought everyone back to work as Joffrey's party began heading back to the Red Keep. Another day in King's Landing, Beric quipped. Fuck King's Landing, spat Clegane, grabbing his hold of the rope. Twin children, a boy and a girl. Jon knew that the secret wasn't one that needed to be kept within the family. Sansa found out, Jon knew, so she told Robb. Jon told Davos, the Lady Melisandre heard it from somewhere. Robb had obviously told Marjorie. Your 3 dragons are famous the world over. But the future of House Targaryen isn't? I find that odd. Dany laughed. The Rose of Highgarden had a way of making one like her. Along with Sansa, the 3 were quickly growing close in the 3 days since having arrived in Winterfell. I make sure they stay out of the spotlight for now. My dragons can protect themselves, obviously. My twins, not until they're older. The Dragon Queen had experience detecting manipulators from the genuine article, and, at least in this case, Marjorie Tyrell wasn't the latter. She had lost just as much of herself as Sansa had. The 3 of them awaited in the courtyard, servants and bannermen rushing about for the impending arrival of Daenerys' entourage. Jon must have been elated, though it's hard to imagine him without a brooding scowl on his face. Marjorie mimed one, and it was quite close. A small laugh was shared by all in innocent fun. One would never know when it could all go to the 7 Hills. He never wanted children, Sansa said once the laughter died down. Never thought anyone would love him enough to marry him. Marjorie frowned, looking to where the object of their discussion stood, arguing with Robb and Davos over something. He's a good catch, apart from being a bastard. Not that that matters any more. If he is truly going to be king in the north, then he is going to make a great choice for you, Daenerys. Yes, he would, Dany replied, beaming. And one was already made. The 3 women shared matching smiles, muted as though Sansa's was. It would take a while for her to fully open up to, though Dany would be glad of the bond they had forged. I presume something between you and the other Stark brother will be brewing? A match between the North and the Reach is quite desirable. A blush formed on Marjorie's face. It wasn't just news of Jon and Dany sharing a room that had gone through the rumour mills of Wintertown. Dany had heard of the other coupling talked about when she, Sansa and Marjorie visited the small folk in the village the previous day. We haven't gotten that far yet, but I'm sure Grandmother is plotting something. Olenna is both scary and someone to admire, Sansa replied, a sentience shared by the other 2 ladies. From the tower blared a horn. Columns approaching! Targaryen banners! At once the entire courtyard moved into rows, in order of importance. Quite the déjà vu for many. This time, however, Jon was in the front. Dany slid by his side, hand finding his underneath their cloaks. The reunions were cordial and pleasant in some respects. Tyrion and Jon sharing quips like old comrades, and heartfelt in others. The 3 Stark children all embraced their mother immediately, Catelyn falling to tears at the sight of little Rickon, who she long thought dead. Though things became tense when she and Jon locked eyes, though Jon's honour and her deep curtsy diffused much of it, for now at least. Dismounting from her horse, Missandei quickly found her queen, who immediately hugged her. My queen! I am profoundly glad that you are all right. I was gravely worried. Her eyes darting to Ghost, suddenly slightly fearful of the white beast. First the dragons, and now this. No need, Missandei. I have my dragons. Daenerys grinned. All of them. Plus Ghost here. The large direwolf nuzzled against Dany's side. He is harmless, I assure you, Dany said, seeing her aide relax. Both their gazes were drawn back to Jon Snow, who was currently conversing with Robb, Sansa and Catelyn in hushed tones. The translator did not miss the deep longing in her queen's gaze. She turned her head back to the enigmatic northerner. If it is within my place, your Grace, I understand what you see in Jon Snow. Inspecting eyes did a once-over, and liked what they saw. He is quite handsome. Missandei's gaze then fell upon Robb Stark. Perhaps it is a trait of the men of House Stark. Dany chuckled. Oh, yes. Jon's northern looks never ceased to light a dragon fire in her core. Wait, I thought something happened between you and Grey Worm. It wasn't hard to realise the 2 were captivated with each other, even given the unsullied commander's dourness. Many things happened, smirked the translator, blushing. The smirk was returned. Oh, I love when Jon does those things. But then, why the wandering eyes for Robb Stark? There is an old saying on Narth, Khaleesi. A person can never be too old or too in love to look. Besides, he only has eyes for the Tyrell woman. Laughing with Missandei, Daenerys had to admit it made sense. The Starks had attractive northern features about them, and for Robb, Sansa, Rickon too, their Tully blood made for a nice combination. But Jon, she shuddered with desire as he looked at her with a small smile. The things that man does to me. Dany smiled back when Jon bade farewell to his siblings and began trudging towards her. Reaching the 2 women, Jon bowed slightly. Lady Missandei, welcome to Winterfell. He could tell that she was important and loyal to Dany, thus had no problem in his mind. Thank you, Lord Snow, and thank you once more for protecting Queen Daenerys. For the woman that freed her from bondage, Missandei would owe her everything to. Dany stifled a laugh at Jon's taciturn look. I think she protected me, rather. The Queen is a remarkable woman. That he is. Missandei already liked Jon Snow. He compliments Daenerys well. Turning back to Dany, Jon adopted his leader mask. Lord Tyrion wants me to call a strategy meeting before, and I quote, I get hopelessly drunk after 2 days riding. Dany rolled her eyes. It sounded like Tyrion, all right. I'll find my way there, Khaleesi. Missandei headed for Catelyn Stark, eyes twinkling, providing the love-struck pair another moment alone. Slipping in next to him, Daenerys looked up at Rhaegal. He had just begun to wake up, jaw opening in a large yawn that made her giggle. The Queen was in a purely good mood for the first time in forever, and wasn't letting go of it. You don't know how happy this makes me. What? It took a moment for Jon to realise that she was talking to him. Smiling, Dany looked at Jon. To see Rhaegal is safe. She wrapped her arms around his neck. Once all the Northern Lords had arrived, it would be a while till they could be openly affectionate. To see you bonded with him. Jon gave a sheepish, modest look, shrugging. The dragon saved me in some tough scrapes, and I him. She knew she needed to know about the injuries he sustained from the Night's King, but that was best served all at once in the meeting. You are his rider, Jon. That is no usual bond. Just then Rhaegal roared and took off, replaced in Winterfell courtyard by his larger brother. Looking for his mother and rider, Balerion roared louder and deeper, drawing all attention. He stopped in front of Jon menacingly, sizing up the newcomer. Dany watched, terrified something might happen, but relaxed slightly when Jon stood his ground. The mighty dread reborn never harmed Arya or Rhaegar, and from the way he peered at Jon, he wasn't about to harm their Targaryen father. Fearless. Well, mostly fearless. Jon slowly placed his hand on Balerion's snout. He had done this with Rhaegal hundreds of times, but for the larger and more imposing dragon, growling, large nostrils sniffing the new human. Balerion grunted, then darted his tongue out to lick Jon's face. A roar then bellowed out as he took to the skies to find his brothers. Jon stood there, face covered in slobber. What just happened? He began to wipe his face clean. Stunned for a moment, slowly a wide smile curled onto Dany's face as she approached Jon. He loves you! Laughing joyously, the Dragon Queen threw her arms around him again. He barely even lets Missandei touch him. Aside from me, the only one Balerion loves are the twins. And you, my beloved dragon wolf. There was a need for yet another sign they were meant to be. This was it. Chuckling, Jon kissed her. Shall we, my queen? He extended his hand for her to take. Pale hand slipping within his, Dany nodded. Lead the way. Stepping through the courtyard, a thought came to Jon once they reached the stairs. A thought that twisted his insides. What if she doesn't believe me about the dead? He doubted most would. Hell, Robb was a northerner, and it took him seeing the Night King at Hardhome to realise the threat was real. For someone who hadn't stepped foot in Westeros her entire life? Tyrion didn't believe it when Benjen told him. What would happen if Dany didn't believe him? Didn't believe Robb, Marjorie, or Davos? After all they were to each other, after their unofficial betrothal, only to lead to a schism between the North and the Targaryen forces. Whether it was decided to take on Joffrey first, or the army of the dead, to have Dany not even consider the threat of the dead would be too disastrous. Even with the Riverlands and the Vale, he didn't have enough men, not nearly enough. Jon had to convince her. He had to. Daenerys moved to enter the planning room when she was tugged back. She was met by Jon's intense grey eyes. Grey, swirling in a silent plea. Jon, what? Her words were cut off. I need you to promise me something, Dany. Promise that you'll trust me in there. Of course, Jon. Why wouldn't I? No, I need you to trust me. Voice low, he was begging. In there, you will hear unbelievable things. I need to know that you'll believe me. Cupping her cheek, willing to see implicit trust on her lovely features. Please. Heart clenching. Close enough that her forehead leaned against his, Dany knew that her dragon wolf would never lie to her. I promise, Jon. A relief crossing his face. He brought their lips together in a sweet kiss. Hands weaving tightly together, he threw open the thick wooden door and led her inside. The cluster of men and women all stood from their seats at the Queen and their leader of the Army of the North walked in. Jon immediately noticed the table had been replaced with a large map table of Westeros. for Ramsay and Viserys to plot their conquest of the Seven Kingdoms. It wasn't a worry now, though there were far bigger worries for all of them. Taking a seat at the head of the table, Jon immediately missed Dany's closeness when she rounded to the opposite end. It was for the best, since they were still officially at two different sides in the great Game of Thrones, he conceded. Dany looked at him, and then at each of the men and women in the map room. All of a sudden, lost in the chaos of battle and elation of being with Jon again, the weight of it all descended on her, an errant hand gliding along the lines that represented her homeland. Her eyes fell upon Jon once more. Together, we will conquer the Seven Kingdoms, my beloved and I. So, shall we begin? On one side sat Catelyn, the Blackfish, Tyrion Missandei, Olenna Tyrell, and Sir Davos. On the other rested Sansa, Robb, Margaery Tyrell, Tormund, and Lyanna Mormont. In the corner on a plain stool sat the Lady Melisandre, quiet but her piercing eyes seeing all. "If I may, your grace." Tyrion drummed his hands on the table, looking at Jon, then his queen. "When Queen Daenerys told me of her plan to send her forces to the north, I was sceptical of how any ruler of the north would bend the knee, even to one he loves. However, new developments, everyone at the table could be trusted to keep that secret, have made that whole business irrelevant. One cannot expect the northern houses to fully bend the knee to a Targaryen." Sansa voiced, "I am not trying to insult you, your grace, but that is a fact, considering our history." Daenerys nodded. "I take no offence, Lady Sansa. While I seek to reclaim my family's birthright, I do not wish to subjugate the north as my brother did." She looked at Jon, both warmth and a steely determination in her eyes. A dragon, menacing and passionate at the same time. "The real threat is Joffrey Baratheon and his rule to the south, the north being the ally that I need. As a result, Lord Snow and I have contracted a betrothal as a sign of my good intentions." Whispers broke out, some a bit shocked, though Jon noticed his siblings and Margaery silently congratulating him in their own way. "We plan on announcing it openly once all the northern lords arrive, but we feel that our trusted advisers deserve to know." Catelyn Stark couldn't meet her queen's gaze. The chamber had been right next to the Lord's chamber, and she had heard every sound. "It would have been better to discuss this before—" "Oh, do shut up," Olenna remarked offhandedly. "I highly doubt any of you didn't consider the probability of this from the beginning, Lord Tyrion." "Not one for bullshit, the Queen of Thorns." "Right. My apologies." The imp knew when he had been bested in the game of wit. "This betrothal is the right thing for our cause, but it means little in the scheme of things because Jon has no title." At Daenerys' frown, he clarified, "For such a marriage to have unifying ties that we hope for, at the very least Lord Snow needs a lordship, preferably, given the northern antipathy for the Targaryens, his own kingdom." "Yes," Lyanna Mormont spoke firmly, almost like a younger version of the Tyrell matriarch. "We northerners are proud, and will not submit in the face of what the Mad King did to Lord Rickard Stark. I am not sure I could." She looked in the direction of Daenerys. "I wouldn't ask you to overlook it, Lady Mormont." Dany admired her spunk. Nodding in thanks, Lyanna continued, "I don't care what his name is. The North needs an equal to represent us, and he is it. He must be king in the North. If you, Queen Daenerys, accede to him being proclaimed as such, the northern houses will stand behind you in the coming fight." For someone who had fought off corpses, living corpses, who had marshalled an army of dragons and giants, it stood to reason that nothing could truly hit Jon with disbelief, but this did. King in the North? Daenerys stared at him intently, no doubt imagining them ruling the world together. It seemed so surreal to Jon, though. He barely wanted to be Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Now they were discussing him ruling over the whole of Westeros, and leapfrogging to that by taking the crown of winter. "Securing the north will allow us to march for King's Landing immediately. The Reach and Dawn should be rallied to our side. We have to take Joffrey at once." Hearing the various proposals from Dany's political advisers, along with those by his own that were not at heart home with him, focused Jon's soul. None of this mattered. The kings and oaths and houses, it all meant nothing with the survival of humanity on the line. He knew his priorities, and the pettiness only made him angry. A resounding smack echoed in the room from where John slammed his fist against the wood. It was shocking, given the usually cool and calm demeanour of the dour northerner. Many seemed to think him mad. Daenerys saw something different, something that filled her with joy. Don't wake the dragon. As her brother had always said, he wasn't a dragon, but her beloved was. This means nothing. We must focus on the true enemy to the north. Tyrion blinked. True enemy to the north? You've just defeated the true enemy to the north, and he rots in Winterfell's dungeons. Joffrey, on the other hand, is both alive and in possession of a massive army. He'll stop at nothing until our heads are mounted on pikes outside the Red Keep. Every man, woman, and child on this earth will die by the end of winter if we don't fight the dead. A moment's silence ensued. Half of those present puzzled, and the other half grimly determined. His love was, sadly for him, among the former. I'm sorry, Lord Snow, Missandei said, but is that a figure of speech, or a euphemism? Not a euphemism, Lady Missandei. I have seen the army of the dead. The Night King is real. The Long Night was real, and it will happen once again, once the dead cross the wall. Oh, not this again. Tyrion laughed, rolling his eyes. First your uncle at Castle Black, now you. I know you fought north of the wall, Jon Snow, but we don't have time to believe in myths and legends. Lord Tyrion. Jon had opened his mouth to retort, but Dany had spoke first. Do you consider my betrothed to be trustworthy? Tyrion blinked. He hadn't expected his queen to challenge him directly, though he should have. He was raised by Ned Stark, so I would. Dany sighed. She found it hard to believe as well, but the vision from long ago, after her labour with Arya and Rhaegar, it haunted her, matching exactly what Jon had just said. Ice crept along her skin. Even her innate dragonfire couldn't banish it. The Night King is real. I've seen it. Davos stood with his leader. So has every one of the free folk, Lord Robb and Lady Marjorie. Jon had to make them understand. He will destroy everything. Targaryen, Stark, Lannister, or Baratheon. Names mean nothing to him. Just more meat for his army. Only fire, dragonglass, and Valyrian steel can destroy them. Which is why your dragons are so important. Even then, everyone looked sceptical. Even Daenerys. It is not hard to understand that men tend to disbelieve what they do not see, or wish not to see. Formally quiet, all eyes turned to Melisandre. The prophecy foretold of the prince that was promised, and a princess that will ride alongside him to ultimate victory. She walked around the table, eyes deep and piercing. I knew from the moment I saw him that Jon Snow, Jaehaerys Targaryen, was this prince. And from her great triumphant entry onto the battlefield, Queen Daenerys was destined to be his companion through the long night. Certainty comes rarely, but for this I am certain. I am certain you do believe this, Lady Melisandre, Tyrion believed. But a curt laugh from Jon interrupted everyone. Pah! I'm sorry, Lord Tyrion. I just remembered once my father saying that everything said before the word but is horseshit. Chuckles and stifled snickers echoed from the room. Sansa, Robb, the Blackfish, Olenna, and even Daenerys amused at the quip. Tyrion, a man of great humour, laughed. A wise saying. So I will get to the point. Belief in the intangible points is one thing, and I do find you trustworthy, Jon Snow, but concrete knowledge is another. My nephew is a monster, and his goal is to rule all over Westeros as a living god. He's surrounded by a new High Septon that essentially stokes his behaviour. Before long he will destroy this entire land if we don't stop him. Only the Dragon Queen can stop him. We must concentrate on that above all else. Looking around the room, then to Dany, Jon allowed for a pregnant pause. Then, turning back to the Tyrion, he locked eyes with the dwarf. What he said then made ice course through Dany's veins. If we don't deal with the army of the dead, then she'll be the queen of a graveyard. One could hear a pin drop in the map room. Dany stared at Jon, the icy chill soaking even through the thick Night's Watch cloak she still possessed. Could this army of the dead be real? Even for someone who had hatched dragons, it seemed so far-fetched. Jon begged you to promise to believe him. Daenerys had seen the earnestness, the desperation in Jon's eyes prior to entering the room. He would never lie to her. She would rather it be a lie. The prospect of facing both the second Mad King and an army of ice monsters was daunting, to say the least. It was Sansa that broke the heated, accusatory silence. The wall will serve as enough protection until the other lords arrive. Joffrey's army is likely still in Dorne, and will take months to move into position. We have the time to adequately determine which threat is more pressing. Agreed, replied the Blackfish. Both he and Catelyn impressed of how resolute the young girl was, a Stark's fortitude and a Tully's cunning. The Vale Mountains and River Run will anchor us against a Lannister assault. I'll secure it and make sure the Freys get what they deserve. Fists clenched, Brynden Tully exited the room. Soon the others followed suit, leaving just Jon and Dany. Seeing her staring at the thick line representing the wall, Jon rounded the table to stand beside his betrothed. So, do you believe me, Dany? Daenerys closed her eyes, fingers tracing the wall symbol. Yes, though I don't want to. Neither do I. Drawing her silently into his arms, Jon placed a kiss on her forehead. I will keep her safe, he thought, be it Joffrey or the Night King. I will not let them hurt Dany or my family. Lacing up the rope that served to keep his trousers from falling around his ankles, the Hound returned from the privy to find someone curled up in his cot. Hey, buddy, that's my cot. He was always served to ask nicely the first time. Fuck off. First come, first serve. Sandor's lips curled in disgust. Dornish moron. In the communal slave pens dotted in the plains west of King's Landing that housed about 2,000 each, only 100 or so cots and hammocks would have been distributed. The man was right. They were first come, first serve, technically. There was a reason this one was the property of Sandor Clegane, and it was always the recent arrivals from Dorne or Astapor that didn't realise it. 7 hells, and I think I'd had a good 2 weeks. I'm going to ask you one more time. Get your ass out of my cot, or I'll make you did. A group of about 3 dozen were already crowding around to watch the coming show. The Dornish newcomer didn't get the message. What part of fuck off don't you understand? His back remained to Clegane. Well, Sandor replied in a glib tone, I did ask nicely. Growling, he hefted the bastard up into his arms, holding the now cursing and writhing man high above his head. Enjoy! Without fanfare, he dumped the squatter onto one of the roaring fire pits, backing away to quickly avoid the hated flames. It took a moment for the Dornish man to regain his composure, but soon he was screaming and scrambling to get out of the flames before they burned him too severely. Whistling, Sandor plopped him back onto his cot. I tried to warn him, Thoros of Myr said from the cot to Clegane's left. Dornish are all the same, Sandor grumbled. At your throat or at your feet. You'd think after Tywin crushed them they'd learn, but no such luck. You have a gentle bedside manner, my friend. Cocking his eyebrow, Clegane stared at his somewhat acquaintance. Why so cheerful, Thoros? I expect it from Dondarrion, but not from your scraggly mug. Thoros snorted. I am offended. I'm usually quite cheerful. Beric is right. The Hound's scowl was quite amusing. But yes, I did manage to gain release. That was surprising to Sandor. Not the dirty innuendo, but what it actually meant. Release. He managed to conduct an escape? Where? The former knight turned to secret priest grinned. To the one that promised. Ruffling his brother's shaggy hair, Jon hugged Rickon tightly. Do take care of yourself. Listen to the Maester's lessons, all right? Don't leave, Jon! The youngest Stark, barely young enough to handle the trauma of the past 6 years, hadn't taken the idea of Jon heading to Dragonstone very well. I don't want to lose you now. Hugging him again, Jon pointed to the 3 milling dragons. See those there? They'll make sure I come back, all right? Tears in his eyes. Rickon nodded and kept his composure. Now, run off to your mother. It was best he did not stress himself, and once he was gone, Jon turned back to Robb. You're the Lord of Winterfell again, Rob. Take care of the place, and make sure the ravens go out to the other northern houses. You can count on it. Or the already had houses, Hornwood, Mazin, and Mormont, as well as the Vale Lords and Brynden Tully. Once the rest had arrived, it would be time to unite against their common enemies. I'll keep you informed on when Sam and Aemon arrive from Castle Black. Jon nodded, looking at Sansa. He hugged her last. I'll watch over the little ones, brother, she said warmly. For some reason, the young dragons were the most agreeable with Sansa, aside from their mother and father, of course. And I'll keep the Lord's chamber well kept for when you return. The former Lord Commander looked puzzled. It's rightfully Rob's, or yours. I couldn't... You're a Stark, Jon, Sansa said with sincerity. You have just as much wolf as dragon. Don't say yourself too lightly, brother. The battle would have been lost without your fortitude. Daenerys and the Knights of the Vale. Had Ramsay held his hoplites back, they could have butchered the charging knights, and a scorpion would have been hell on Daenerys' dragons. Jon didn't know where Sansa got her military knowledge, but it was spot on. The Knights of the Vale. Can we trust Littlefinger? He is heading back to King's Landing. We can't trust him fully, she replied after a moment's thought. But we'd be fools to think of him as a pawn of Joffrey either. A thought popped into Sansa's head. Jon, before you leave? A raven came from the citadel. A white one. Winter is here. Feeling the snowflakes hit his skin, Jon laughed softly. Father always promised, didn't he? The three Starks shared wistful, fond smiles of the man now gone. It was in this form that Daenerys approached them. She was dressed in her riding finery and Jon's cloak. Thank you, she said to her two soon-to-be siblings, for all that you have done for myself and my retinue. It should be us that thank you, your grace, Robb said, bowing his head slightly. Sansa nodded as well. Tell our niece and nephew that their aunts and uncles love them. Dany beamed at the two Starks. Of course. Taking Jon's hand, she led him to the waiting dragons. I'm glad that they formed up to me. I told you, my queen, Jon replied. They are your family now. Kissing his cheek, Dany broke off to head to Balerion, a grin forming on her lips. The queen was certain Jon's eyes were rooted onto her backside. Dragons know commands from their rider, but will respond to Valyrian. And what Valyrian would you say to get them to fly? Dany climbed atop the red-black dragon as a Dothraki warrior would mount a horse. To get them airborne, Sorevez. You can use Valahad if you want them to go faster in the air. Jon furrowed his brow, standing next to Rhaegal's large shoulder. Sorevez, he mused loudly. He was sure he had butchered the beautiful Valyrian command. From the rapidly forming smile and amused glint in his love's eye, Jon knew that he had. I didn't butcher it that badly. You did, with that northern accent of yours. Dany laughed merrily, taking pleasure in these sweet moments with her dragon morph. She slid on to Balerion, hearing him growl contentedly from the contact with his mother. Settling on Rhaegal's back, Jon leaned forward and rubbed his neck. Ready, boy? The green dragon hooted in response. I hope you are, because I don't know if I am. The former Lord Commander had ridden Rhaegal before, plenty of times, but aside from his first flight over the wall with Tormund, Sam, Gilly, and Little Sam, he had kept at a low altitude to familiarise himself with dragon-back riding. Crossing much of Westeros would be another thing entirely. Casting a look across to Balerion, Jon caught Dany's eyes. She smiled at him, a smile of pure, unadulterated love. Jon still couldn't believe it. The most desirable, unattainable beauty on earth had fallen for him. Fallen for Jon Snow back when he was nothing more than the unwanted bastard of Winterfell. If she could love and trust me, then I can trust myself. Another hoot left Rhaegal's throat, joined by Balerion and Edaron, his children comforting him. Ready, Jon? Dany called out to him. Aye. A roar boomed across the snowy fields as Balerion charged into the air, Edaron right after. He looked towards Rhaegal's face. The dragon turned his head back to look at his father. Sorevez! gripping the neck spines tight. It served him well when Rhaegar lurched into the sky. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed this. Loving every bit of this. It's basically domestic with war planning mixed in with it, which is so Game of Thrones it's unreal. It's just nice. Sansa, Robb and Rickon becoming family to Dany very quickly. Dany choosing to believe Jon's judgment over the dead. It's beautiful. It's really beautiful. Anyway, remember to like, comment and subscribe and hit the bell to get notified for whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another one of my videos. Bye!